Hello and welcome to the Black to the Future Action Fund's DNC panel, which is entitled Black Futures in Politics. I'm Alicia Garza, principal of the Black to the Future Action Fund, and I'm so excited to bring you a jam-packed conversation about how it is that we make Black futures matter in politics. To kick us off, we have remarks from Representative Barbara Lee, who definitely speaks for me, right here from Oakland, California. So let me go ahead and turn it over to the Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, good afternoon. And first, thank you all for being with us. But also, Alicia, let me just thank you for your tremendous leadership, but also for showing us what really Black politics should be today and tomorrow and for the future. You're a visionary. You, thank God, push the envelope with all of us who were elected, and you insist that Black politics, not only in the future, but right now, be the central focus of progressive politics, because racial equity and racial justice is so embedded in who we are as African Americans. But racial injustice and systemic racism is so much a part of the DNA of this country until we have to push and fight hard for not race neutral policies. But yes, we have to remember that race is a factor in every policy of this country. And so there's no race neutral solution to any policy. And so you've been telling us that forever. And I'm really proud of your staying the course. And everyone is hearing you and seeing you. Black Lives Matter everywhere in the world now. So thank you, Alicia, so much. And I am so proud that you're my constituent. I am really happy to be with you during this convention, actually. I serve as the co-chair of the California delegation, along with Congressman Khanna and Supervisor Hilda Solis. And I just have to share, I found a picture of myself at the 1972 convention, sitting on the floor during a meeting with Shirley Chisholm. And that was my first convention. That was how I got involved in politics, because I did not believe that the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party spoke to the issues which myself, as a young African-American single mom raising two small boys on public assistance and food stamps and Medicare, I didn't think any of them were relevant. And here comes Shirley Chisholm. And she was running for president. I was about to flunk a class because I was required to work in a field campaign of one of the candidates. And I said, no, flunk me, because I don't believe in any of these guys. They're not doing what they should do, nor saying what they should say about the future of the country. And that included the Black community. And so Shirley came to Mills College, where I attended school. I was president of Black Student Union, community worker with the Black Panther Party. Shirley Chisholm talked about really the future of Black politics. She talked about ending poverty, ending the Vietnam War. She was for women's reproductive rights. She talked about public education. Her positions on every single issue that we care about today were where she was in 1972 and where we need to be and to go in the future. So looking at that picture today of 1972 at that convention, and then having a chance to be with you for a few minutes really so inspires me, because I know that all of you are going to move forward out of this convention and fight hard to make sure that we elect the Biden-Harris ticket, but also know that as an African-American community, we have to keep fighting for what we believe in, and to make sure that Black politics is included and is part of the policy agenda of this new administration. So our work is really just beginning. I mean, and let me just go over a few statistics to make the point. First of all, we know that African-American women die in childbirth, and nearly 4 times that of white women. So the future of Black politics has to make sure that this does not happen, that is no more. And so we have to have policies that ensure that. We have to make sure that Black and brown men and women are not abused nor murdered by law enforcement. And that is the future of Black politics. But that is something that Alicia and so many have worked on, I know, coming from my community since the 60s and 70s in terms of police misconduct. Part of the agenda that we push forward with this new administration. So we have a day of reckoning coming in this country. I support HR 40, reparations. I hope that that's a part of the future of Black politics that you can embrace, because we have to not only repair the damage, but we have to push forward in terms of making sure that that damage is corrected in the policies and programs and funding priorities of this country. My bill, HR 100, calling for a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission. We've got to get to that point where we have that day of reckoning within the historical context of the Middle Passage 401 years ago, and how systemic racism is a reflection of the fact that we have not ended and cut those chains and broken those chains of slavery. And so I hope that we have a chance during this session to really talk about the real deal in terms of Black politics, because that means we've got to dig deep. That means we've got to dismantle and disrupt all of the systems of systemic racism, income inequality, racial injustice, and build and transform this country into what we know it can be transformed into. But that's not going to happen unless we organize, and unless we keep that street heat on, and unless we register to vote, and yes, be part of the census, fill out your census forms, and make sure your family and friends do that, and get involved politically. And I have to say, we have to elect local, state, federal officials who really will keep the Black agenda central to their agenda. And also, we have to remember that we hold elected officials accountable. And so elections are about holding elected officials accountable. And so having the Black agenda as central to these elections, I think is so critical to us winning, but also after January, making sure that the accountability measures are there, and only you can do that. And so this inside-outside strategy, it will work. I've seen it work with many, many groups around the country. And so it's about time. And I've been to many, many Black conferences and participated in many efforts of the DNC. I'm a member of the DNC, and so much over the years. And Black political power is what we insist on. It is what is the future of Black politics. And so we're here to stay. And I think Black progressives have got to understand and believe that we're here to stay, and know that I believe truly the Black community is a progressive community, because we never would have gotten this far given the injustices that we dealt with. And so we've been the ones who not only have reformed what we have at this point in terms of justice, but we're the ones who are going to have to complete the work of justice in America. And so just thank you all for having this conversation, because it's no longer can Black people tinker around the edges on reform. No more. We have got to deal with the structural and the institutional biases and racism that exists within every fabric of this society. And that is, to me, the future of Black politics. And that's what Black to the Future really means for me. And that is structural reform, but it also means, in many ways, a revolution, because that's what has to happen. We have to dismantle the old system and build the new system. And Alicia, thank you. I know that's what the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter and what our young people are insisting on. And just know that there are many, many, many of us in the Congressional Black Caucus and in Congress who hear you, who see you, and who have been fighting these battles for many years, and who have many bills, as you know, that really track and really provide that framework to begin the future of a real revolution in our Black political agenda. So thank you again.
Oh, you are so incredible. Thank you for spending time with us today and for opening up this event in just the absolute best way. We appreciate you, Congresswoman. Thank you for your service, and thank you for leading this country in the direction that it really needs to go. So here we are, folks. We're getting ready to dive into an action-packed agenda. And I just want to tell a quick story about how we got here. The Black to the Future Action Fund was launched in 2018 as a way to make Black communities powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in every aspect of our lives. What we started our organization with was a project called the Black Census Project, where we set out to talk to as many Black people as possible about what we experience every single day in the economy, in our democracy, in our society. And bigger than that, what are our ideas for what we want to see done about the challenges that are enduring in our communities? From that process, we were able to develop a Black Agenda 2020, which our next panel is going to talk a little bit about. In the Black Agenda 2020, what we've been able to do is distill the ideas that our communities have about how we want to see problems addressed from City Hall all the way up to Congress. Everybody asks us, how can we make Black Lives Matter? And the Black Agenda 2020 is an opportunity for us to be able to do that. You can check out the agenda on our website at black2thefuture.org. But here to get into a deeper discussion about our vision for Black futures and the Black Agenda 2020, we are joined by some of the baddest people in the game. I'd love to introduce my sister, my friend, Angela Rye, who is the CEO of Impact Strategies. She is the founder and the principal. She's all the things, okay? We are also joined by my brother, Michael Harriot, who is a senior writer at theroot.com and just a general intellectual powerhouse. Don't sleep on Michael Harriot. You want to know some stuff about the economy? You want to know some stuff about history? You want to know some stuff about anything? Michael Harriot's the person you need to be talking to. And then finally, we are joined by Glynda Carr, my sister, who has been out here killing the game, toiling hard, sometimes in the dark, right? She's just out here handling business, making sure that Black women are front and center in our political system. Glynda Carr is the president and CEO of Higher Heights, and we are about to dive into a conversation about vision and the Black Agenda for 2020. So, Michael, let me start with you. We all know that the rules are rigged against our communities, but we also know that's not the end of our story. We believe at the Black to the Future Action Fund that Black futures can be different and we can be powerful in those futures. We deserve to be powerful in all aspects of our lives, and we think that the Black Agenda is a vision and a platform for how we get there. But look, after 4 years of a Trump-Pence administration and all the things that 2020 has been, global pandemic, a housing crisis, state-sanctioned violence against our communities, an economic recession, a deepening climate crisis, should I bring any more to the table? The question here, Mr. Harriot, is this. What do you see as the state of Black communities in this country right now? How are we faring? And what can we do to start to right some of the wrongs that our communities have been plagued by for generations?
Well, I think the state of Black communities is that we're becoming more aware of our political and economic power, and we're seeking ways to increase and create a level playing field for ourselves. And as America progresses and grows, it's what's different about the Black community is that there still is a Black community, right? We're one of the few populations that hasn't been assimilated into America. And it's, got a long history there because of redlining, economic injustices, and intention, right? So we can't forget about that. But if we were to look at the Black community as a whole, we would have to say that we are aware of the disparities that exist between our communities and the rest of America. And we want to grab hold of the economic and political and social institutions that can get us to the level where we know that we can be.
Amazing. You just killed it, as per usual. Let me switch over to my sister, Angela Rye. Angela, you have been such a fairy godmother as it comes to the Black Agenda 2020. And we know that this agenda represents the voices and the political will of more than 30,000 Black people from every corner of this country. I mean, all 50 states, across every demographic. If you hear, we talk to you. We also know the Black Agenda provides a policy roadmap for how to make Black people powerful. Share with us, Angela, why did you sign on to the Black Agenda, and why do you believe it's the right path forward? And talk to us a little bit about why Democrats in every elected office up and down the ballot should adopt the Black agenda.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Well, thank you, first of all, Alicia, to the team at Black to the Future for convening us today. It's such an important conversation. And I'm thrilled and humbled to be here with you. It is a joy to not only listen to you host your podcast, but to watch you do your magic right now, especially with the receipt, because Alicia lives for a receipt. If y'all didn't know, you're going to learn today. Black agenda is so important to me, and I've been screaming it from the mountaintops and all through the valleys like John the Baptist, because it is a piece of work that for so long our communities are used to not having, right? So I can think of the last thing that I've researched that was a substantive Black agenda for Black people, and that is the National Black Political Convention agenda that was adopted in Gary, Indiana in 1972. Well, you took it upon yourself with your team to talk to Black people, to just find out what they need, to find out what they feel like would help them survive and thrive in this country. So when you say it is to make Black people powerful, as is stated throughout the agenda, that's the point. Like, you had me at power, right? Like, we for so long have equated power with hogging stuff because of, slave mentality and how we were kind of reared and told to believe in this country that power is associated with greed, and that is the opposite and the antithesis of what this agenda stands for. One of the pillars in particular that I think is abundantly relevant as they start the Democratic Convention this week is about help Black people or make Black people powerful in our democracy, in the same democracy that right now Donald Trump is using the Postmaster General to try to destroy because he's afraid to lose. In our democracy, the same one where we have been adversely impacted and probably at the greatest levels by voter suppression. In our democracy, where so often they say that, we're probably going to commit voter fraud where there are no instances, right? But in our same democracy where they will tell us that our votes don't matter, but yet work really, really hard to suppress them, to keep us out, even when we have returning citizens, right? The fact that the Supreme Court ruled that Florida could actually have these folks who are returning to pay these fines when they know they're returning, so they probably don't have the money. In our democracy, we need to be powerful because that, to me, is the threshold. If we can just get across the threshold to, electing people who represent our interests, pushing an agenda that matters to us, even as I sit here with you and Glynda, and hi, Michael, no shade, I'm talking about the Black women real quick. We all came together to push an agenda that mattered, some in our respective lanes. But at the end of the thing, we came together to say, let me tell you what it's gonna be. And we're telling you this collectively. We didn't do any one-offs. We all came together. And I just hope that example will show the rest of the folks in our community that if you move ego out the way, if you move slave mentality out of the way, and you get in alignment with what will make the difference for your power, we got it. Like, that's all we need was us. Michael, we can help you too, by the way. We can help you too. Sisters can help you too.
Woo, it's getting hot up in here. Thank you, Angela. You really just broke it all the way down. And thank you for being such an incredible champion of the Black Agenda 2020. Glynda. So we all know that Black women are the core base of the Democratic Party. And our Black agenda touches upon several different policy priorities, and it features 6 core principles: the economy, our democracy, the legal system, our communities, our families, and our society. How can we capitalize on this political moment where the first Black and Indian woman has been tapped to run next to former Vice President Joe Biden? Kamala Harris has been tapped to run as vice president alongside of him. How do we capitalize on this moment of firsts to elevate policies that matter to Black voters, but in particular to Black women? How do we make Black women feel seen and give Black communities hope and joy during these really challenging times?
Ooh, that hope and joy, girl. Mm-hmm. One, thanks for convening us. And I love the ability to dream into the future, right? And that future is Black. And I think For me, when you look at your 6 pillars, Black future to me is that, in particular, Black women want economically thriving, educated, and healthy and safe communities, right? We all know we can believe that is the level set. That is what we know we want. Now, the question is, what's the roadmap and how do we get there? And how do we get there is collectively, each one of us have a role to play, right? Black women are the defenders of our homes, our communities, and our democracy. And we are the people that will do 2 things. We will lead. More of us are stepping off the sidelines and running for office on the local level and now looking at the highest office. And we are voters. So at the end of the day, in 2020, Black women are definitely at level of like tolerance. We are demanding our return on our voting investment. And that is in the policies that directly impact Black women, our families, and our communities. And we're claiming seats at decision-making tables. So look at 2020. We have a record number of Black women running for office, particularly a record number of Black women running for Congress. We have a record number of Black women who are actually nominees. And all we need to do over the next 80 so days is give them all the tools they need to win in November. Now, at the end of the day, democracy doesn't begin on election day. And that's often where we have a disconnect in our community. Regardless if that elected leader looks like us or not, we actually have to do 2 things. We have to create the environment for our champions to be bold leaders and pass bold policies and hold those who aren't accountable. And that is a 365-day power building moment that we need to do as Black Americans. And at the end of the day, when you have diverse decision-making tables, even if we don't agree all the time on policies, those decision-making tables still make better decisions. And so I am hopeful in this moment that we will. I always say that you can't harness power you don't know you have. In over the last couple election cycles, Black women have stepped into that power. But at the end of the day, if we weren't powerful, they would not be suppressing our vote and continuing to put up man-made barriers and institutional obstacles to our elected leadership. And so when we know that we are literally living in that power, I think you'll see the ability to move transformative agendas. So I'll leave this. So my parents told me they did not name me after Glynda, the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz. Although it is one of our favorite movies, my brother and we watch it every single time that it's on. So I'll leave you with something that Glynda said from The Wizard of Oz. You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it yourself. And I wholeheartedly believe that the women that are running for office in the spirit of Shirley Chisholm and those who are going to organize our house, our block, our church, and our sorority in our unions to the polls, that we're absolutely leaning into and crashing through that power.
You're incredible. Thank you for all of your work, Glynda. You are absolutely correct. We've always had the power. We just needed to see it for ourselves. So I'm going to do a quick lightning round with each of you before we've got to pivot because we do have our illustrious Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley on deck waiting to have a conversation with us. OMG. Okay. So now that I'm done fangirling, let me do my quick lightning round. So here's the deal, y'all. Not everybody is happy about what's going on right now. Let's just keep it a buck. And frankly, lots of times we say, you got to vote so that you can hold politicians accountable. And then people be like, well, how does voting make politicians accountable? So let me ask you in a final lightning round, what is one thing that we can do right now to leverage the power of our votes in this upcoming election? What does it mean, actually, to be holding elected officials accountable? Michael, I'm going to start with you.
I think one of the biggest impacts that we could have on politics in general is just not to use our votes in a general election, but to let those politicians know that we voted for them and we are the way that they got in. Sometimes I remember once I passed a street light that was out 1 million times, and my neighbor, who was white, eventually said, oh, I've never even noticed that. And then she called the city council person. It's just that we aren't trained to say, oh, we got you in there. Now my everyday life you're going to be held accountable to all of the things that I see wrong in my everyday life. So call your congressman when you see something wrong, even if it's just a street light, even if it's just a local tax or a school policy decision that you don't like. The key is not just the voting, but when you get them into office, to let them know that they can't just do whatever they want to once they get in. And then the next round, they won't be able to lie because we've held them accountable.
Boom. Angela?
Yes, to use something that Alicia does often, a couple of things. So let me start with this one. The first thing I would say, and Alicia, you asked me this earlier about how we ensure that Black elected officials, really every elected official, signs on to the Black agenda. That is imperative. One of the things that we learned from Gary, Indiana, is they had a Black pledge for elected officials and folks who were everything else. And I think that it is important to align around this. You also say in the agenda that a Black agenda is a progressive agenda. There should be no light between those things. So let's just go. The second thing, to use an example that is immediately before us in terms of accountability and demands, I'm going to go to my good friend, Michael Harriot and brother. As I look at his amazing wall of some of his favorite MCs, he is lacking any Best Coast representation. And Michael, I'm flagging this because I certainly know that your intentions were not to have no West Coast representation on this wall, because you want to be a man of the people. And so I would say to an elected official, like, let me make sure that you don't exclude us in your policy agenda. Let me make sure that you don't exclude Snoop, NWA, and Dr. Dre behind you, my good brother. So that's how you hold them accountable to it. And then if you have the money to do campaign contributions, you withhold those checks. If you don't have the money, but you got the power of the people, you withhold your people. And then 3, maybe I'll call Rashad to get a color of change petition. He told me he's not the petition guy all the time, but this requires the petition. I don't know what this Best Coast situation is back here, Michael.
I promise I didn't put her up to that, but now that she brings it up, it is a good point. Let me go ahead and go over here to Miss Glynda. Miss Glynda, take us home. What is the way? What are the things we can do right now to hold our elected officials accountable?
I mean, dag, Michael usually, literally I use the light lamp post all the time, and then Angela just both. But I will add this: I was a chief of staff of a New York State senator, and the squeaky wheel actually gets the oil. People assume you have to have wealth to influence democracy, and you don't. It is actually the people still trump money if we squeak loud enough. And so that is, I'll use an analogy since we're all using it. So although I haven't been able to wear any of my fabulous shoes, y'all know Black women, we love our shoes, and brothers love their sneakers. So imagine if we just decide we're going to do something, like we all have a role to play in our shoe game. You can put on a pair of running heels and run for office. You can put on a pair of lobbying sneakers and you actually go and meet and lobby. The city hall, state houses in the Capitol are open for us, and we ought to be there, being in regular dialogue. You can put on your down home boots, and you can take to the streets. So and you can donate a pair of shoes to an elected official or an organization that inspires you. So imagine if we just do something, put on a pair of shoes, find your lane, we all can be engaged in this democracy. But if we don't speak to our elected officials, those who don't have the best interest of our communities definitely will try to get their ears.
Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon. Thank you, Michael Harriot. Thank you, Angela Rye. Thank you, Glynda Carr. Y'all are the bomb. Follow them on Instagram. Go ahead and do it.
I'm about to text Michael about this wall, though. I'm not playing. I'm about to lobby on that right now.
Listen, there's accountability that's happening right
There's a letter writing campaign that's about to happen.
Michael on Twitter.
And
Dr. Dre and Ice Cube are right there, right out of frame. Dr.
Well,
Dre.
You need to fix the camera so we believe you.
As we transition, I'm so excited to be in conversation with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. You are amazing, sis. And I am just so delighted to see your beautiful face. And I can't wait for the people who are watching right now to not only see the same, but to see you spit some fire, because we ready for the fire. So also, I just always have to say to you, Congresswoman, your lighting game is always on point. So I just want to be real clear. I just want to be real clear and say
yours, that natural one. You were luminous, always.
No, I try to give y'all a little Bay Area today. So here's the deal, Congresswoman, and thank you for your patience here. We all know that Black women, as I said, are the base and the heart of the Democratic Party, that we vote at higher rates than all other groups. And we know that we're in this moment where we are both celebrating a historic opportunity to elect on a ticket the first Black woman and the first Indian woman who would serve in this role. I want to start off by just talking about, and you and I, just to keep it a buck, right? You and I were supporters and still support Senator Elizabeth Warren, who captured our hearts absolutely with her clarity of conviction around what it would take to actually make Black Lives Matter in policy. And in this moment, I want us to have a little conversation about how these things are actually not in contradiction. We need more Senator Warrens. We need more people like Senator Harris to not be the first, right? But to infuse our political system with a new sensibility around what is going on in our communities and how we harness the political will to get some things done. So let me start off by asking you this. Our presence and our enthusiasm is critical to the outcomes of this election. And a successful ticket, of course, has to address the needs and concerns of us in order to move this country closer to what it promises to be. So talk to me a little bit about what do you see the role being for a Black agenda, and in particular, the role that Black women are playing in this upcoming election cycle up and down the ticket?
Well, it's central. And I just want to pick up on what you were saying regarding Senator Warren and Senator Harris. You know, one of the things that I often challenge in the district that I represent, which is the Massachusetts 7th, I served on the Boston City Council for 8 years. First woman of color, first Black woman elected to that body. Now, 6 out of the 13 people that serve on that body are women of color, and 2 of them have held the gavel as council president. And, you know, what I caution activists from is that often they will only engage Black electeds about our issues. When we need to demand and organize, because we get what we organize for, that every elected official has an efficacy and is knowledgeable about our issues, you know, especially Black folks, but not only Black folks. And so what is the power of a Black agenda? We find ourselves in this national reckoning on racial injustice. I don't want to say that this is the second coming of the civil rights movement, because we've always been in it, right? Rashad always says we're in the underground railroad phase, right? So we've always been in it. And we find ourselves with this national reckoning on racial justice. So to me, what does that mean? It means being unapologetically Black. And I want that from Black elected officials that will operate without self-agency and determination and be unflinching in the pursuit of the full liberation and emancipation of Black people. And I also want my colleagues that are not Black to be equally as unapologetic and as committed. And I endorse enthusiastically the Black agenda because it speaks to the intersectionality of our lived experiences and the burden and the disproportionate hate, hurt, and harm that has been foisted onto Black Americans through policy. So if you really believe that Black lives matter, thank you for your post, but show me your budget, right? The only receipts we care about are laws and budget and being race specific. So if you believe Black lives matter, then you believe Black data matters, that Black research matters, that Black student debt matters, that Black home ownership matters, that the climate crisis is one that's disproportionately impacting us, and the Green New Deal has everything to do with our ability to improve our public health outcomes and to not just survive, but to thrive. So that's what, you know, it's central to our success, not only in this election, but in our recovery equitably from this pandemic, managing the conflated crises of a public health crisis that we are disproportionately bearing, and also the economic hardship. That eviction tsunami that we're on the precipice of, Black folks are leading that, right? The pre-crisis was that because of 2008, whatever Black home ownership and wealth we had, we lost. So the majority of us became renters. And now we find ourselves and many of these are Black female-headed households. So equal pay is a racial justice issue, is a Black agenda issue. So that's what I think it is. It's about being intersectional and unapologetic.
I love you so much.
You love Kimberly Crenshaw.
I do.
That's who you love.
I love her too. I love her too. And let me tell you, she's been pulling me by my ear for years. She knows. I'm like, I actually know that intersectionality does not mean diversity. And I know that because of Dr. Crenshaw.
That's right.
So let me ask a provocative question here. Look, we are having a million conversations as a nation right now about race. And in this moment, we are talking a lot about representation. And being in these roles is important, right? Black people have been shut out of leadership as a way to consolidate power in the hands of a few. So it does actually matter to have Black people in positions of power. But what we talk about at the Black to the Future Action Fund a lot is that we support Black people with a progressive vision for how to get things done for our communities. And so I wanted to ask you, let's lend some clarity to the conversation that's happening nationally. Is representation enough? How do we match positions with policies that improve and empower our communities? How do we bring together the symbol and the substance so that we're not constantly thirsty while seeing our people in positions of power, but not necessarily feeling the changes in our communities? How do we bridge that gap?
Absolutely. I think representation matters. I'm very, behind me, you'll see a print actually of Shirley Chisholm. And I have the honor of occupying the same physical office space in Longworth 1108 that was her office. She had 3 offices during her time in the House, and I occupy that space. So lots of good mojo. And then, we're celebrating this centennial of the 19th Amendment. And of course, we know that did not give Black women the right to vote. We did not earn that. We had to fight for that until 55 years later. And so now that we find ourselves in 2020, and we have Senator Harris at the top of the ticket, of course, representation matters. But I think working families characterize this so well that electing this ticket is a door. It is not a destination. And so that's how I think we always have to think about this, that we would never give short shrift to the power of representation because people need to see themselves mirrored and reflected. And we know that having her there, look, we've seen that in the Senate. She took up the mantle on the Black maternal mortality crisis. She took up the mantle. She just introduced a bill on uterine fibroids. She partnered with me to ensure that there would be an equitable economic recovery for Black-owned businesses, right? So representation matters, but how do we marry the two? We organize for it. This is a door, but not the destination. We have to continue to organize, to mobilize, to vote, to legislate for it.
Hands down, a door, not a destination. I'm going to be using that from here forward. Last question for you, Congresswoman, because I know this is a busy week for you, so let's get right to it. Your role as a member of Congress gives you unique access and insight into the state of our country. What's giving you inspiration and hope for the future of our country and for our communities?
Well, I've been telling folks for a while that the squad is big. For those that thought that was just 4 members of Congress, you are greatly mistaken. The squad is anyone doing the work of building a more equitable and just world. And that is so many people. And that squad is growing. That squad is growing in our streets and in our communities, and it's growing in the halls of Congress. So, as much as my heart breaks that we have to continue to organize, to protest, to demonstrate, to mobilize for people to see our humanity, my heart swells that we do continue to come together. I'm also really inspired by the mutual aid and collective care that I've observed in community in the midst of this pandemic and the direction with which people are moving in. They're saying, I know the gravity of our challenges are great, but I'm not going to be paralyzed by that. The other day I was speaking with a brother in arms and he said, the thing is like despair is clear, but hope is opaque. And that is what is the challenge. But, you know, so now we have the opportunity. Let's define that hope. Let's make it less opaque. So I'm just so excited about Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones. I'm excited that the squad is growing. And we'll have more folks advancing a progressive agenda, which is a Black agenda. These are unprecedented times, Alicia. They require unprecedented organizing, mobilizing, and unprecedented hope.
Facts on facts on facts. Congresswoman, thank you for being such an incredible champion for our communities. Thank you for showing us what it means to match symbol with substance. And we absolutely follow your leadership. And we're so glad to be in this fight alongside of you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for laying the blueprint. Policy is my love language, and you speak it fluently.
Much love to you, Congresswoman. Thank you. All right, team, we are transitioning. And speaking of transitioning, we are moving into a conversation right now about how we bridge the gap from vision to policy and power. I'm joined by three incredible leaders. But before I introduce them, because I'm just like, I'm giddy, so I got to calm myself down before I introduce my team. I just want to talk a little bit about how we are moving the Black agenda across this country. We didn't just put together a legislative agenda to collect dust on a shelf somewhere. We are organizing around that agenda, using the agenda as a tool for people to be able to make decisions about where they're going to put their support. I always say that it's most important that we don't adopt this narrative that we have to kind of just support candidates because that's what we're supposed to be doing. Quite frankly, every politician should do the work to earn your vote. And so much of politics in this country right now functions like a reality show. We focus on people's personalities rather than their politics and rather than their policies. So the Black agenda is a tool for us to be able to use to determine who is going to earn our vote. So speaking of earning votes, I have some of the biggest powerhouses in electoral organizing in the whole country, especially as it relates to Black people. So let me not get any farther down the line without introducing this incredible team. Earlier, I said we were joined by three of the baddest strategists, but actually it's four, because that's how we get down. So let me start off by introducing my friend, my sister, Nse Ufot, who is the CEO of the New Georgia Project. She's the business, and I will probably end up asking her something about video games and voting, because I'm just obsessed with it, and I've been obsessed with it ever since I met her. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Next is my brother, Derrick Johnson, who is the president and CEO of the NAACP, one of the oldest and largest organizations serving Black communities in the country. Thank you, Derrick, for joining us. Also in the house, we have my sister, the siren, the strategist, LaTosha Brown, who is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. And honestly, somebody who just lifts my spirit every time I see your face. So hello, LaTosha. And then finally, we have my brother, my homie, my muse, my inspiration, Rashad Robinson, who is the spokesperson for the Color of Change PAC, and he is the president of Color of Change. Rashad, Nse, LaTosha, and Derrick, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Let me start off by asking a fundamental question, and I'm going to start off here with LaTosha. Sis, Black Voters Matter is out here with the blackest bus in the nation, going from community to community, not telling people you have to vote because your ancestors died for your right to do so, not telling people that if you don't vote, your voice doesn't matter. We've heard all those messages, and we know that those messages don't activate our communities. What activates our communities, right, is inspiring folks about how they can use their power to make change. And you and your organization are deeply rooted in that strategy. I'm hoping that you can talk with us a little bit about why we need to vote. So if it's not because our ancestors died for our right to do so, if it's not because if you don't vote, then you shouldn't have nothing to say, why should we be voting right now? What's at stake? And what is the damage that's been done over the last period? So what's at stake if we don't show up?
So thank you, sister. I love you so much. And you always make me smile when I see you. And my other comrades in the struggle on here. You know, I think it's really important. At the end of the day, it's real simple. Why we should vote? 2 words. Right? Because we matter. At the end of the day, it's really around us that ultimately people have given us all kinds of reasons outside of ourselves, but this is really about us. And that ultimately, when we think about it, this is how I roll. If a decision is going to be made, every single aspect of our lives is impacted by policy. Every single, you can't even die and your folks are able to get the insurance without having a death certificate. Someone creates that every aspect of it. And because of that, if something is going to be made, any policy that is going to be made to impact me, I need to be a part of that decision-making process. And so I think ultimately we really have to connect this conversation around voting. It's not about participation. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times people have gotten turned off of the process because we've only been treated as we're participants in the process. No, this is about power. That ultimately, when we're talking about voting, this is around one lever of accessing power that can actually reduce the harm in our community, right? Can actually back some people up and get them out of office that are creating harm in our community, and at least get some people in office that can align with our values, at least so we can get some resources. I don't believe that voting is a panacea of everything. So I'm very rooted in the reality that I don't think that Black liberation, we're going to vote ourselves out of Black liberation or into Black liberation. What I do believe, though, is just as Brother Malcolm said, by any means necessary, whatever tools are available to make sure that access for my people and for me to demonstrate my agency, I'm going to use that tool. And that when we're thinking about the allocation of resources, when we think about how decisions are made around us and policy and who's in position of power, because I can tell you as somebody who has gone into courtrooms, I can tell you there is a major difference between having a certain DA that is aligned with our community and another DA that can make the difference between whether our children or people in our family get probation or get 20 years to life in jail, right? I can tell you the difference of what it means when you have a superintendent of the school board system that is aligned with our values and one that is anti our community. It makes a difference. So ultimately, because I am really for the liberation of Black people, I am going to use every single tool that is available to us, right, to reduce the harm and to literally get us closer to be able to create this space so we can have Black liberation. So voting, when I tell people about voting, I don't tell folks, if you don't vote, you don't count. If you don't vote, you don't matter. I hate when people say that. 1, it's not true. 2, it completely undermines the value system that I believe in. You matter. That ultimately your value is not in relationship to this system. Your value is God created you, and you have value in your personage, right? And that in voting is actually an expression of you demonstrating your agency. That you're literally you're going to use your agency to actually shape the things that are around you and your community around you. I think as we're doing on the Blackest Bus in America, as we've been going around and talking to people, oftentimes when folks are having the conversation around, I don't want to vote because I don't think it matters or they're not going to do right, oftentimes folks will try to evangelize them. Like they got to give them this big Easter speech around why you need to vote and how you don't know. That's not what we do. What we do is real simple. We listen. Because the truth of the matter is all of us on this phone at some point have felt like when I voted, it didn't make a difference. Every one of us have felt that way, right? And all of us, so ultimately, I think that if you start from a point, and oftentimes, every single time when we had this conversation, and say, well, okay, then, brother, then tell me what it is that you care about. We ain't got to talk about voting, just tell me what you care about. And then after there's a conversation around that, if you're able to connect what their vision is for themselves and how voting as a practical tool can actually help move that shifts the conversation, because the center of the conversation isn't about this power outside of themselves. The conversation is centered in the power that they have and demonstrating and using their agency. So part of the work that we're doing is reminding Black people that they matter. And because they matter, we believe that they should use every tool and their agency to make sure that we're holding other people accountable of value in us. So that's part of how we frame our work around voting.
Oh, the business. Let me go to my sister, Nse. Nse, we don't talk about voter suppression because we need to. It takes many different forms. Can you share with us and with our audience some of the tactics that you are already seeing. I mean, you are in the state where the man who is running the state got to that position. I'm going to say it. I'm supposed to say allegedly, but I'm going to say you got there because you stole people's right to participate. So can you talk about, make it plain for people, what are some of the tactics that you're already seeing, and what should we be paying attention to as we get closer to Election Day?
Yeah. I will say this, voter suppression, this country and, you know, my state, Georgia, has both a long and a recent history of voter suppression. And that, you know, we have seen tactics as sort of basic as, you know, sheriff's deputies in full uniforms going door to door in Georgia's rural Black Belt, verifying the address of newly registered Black voters. We've seen, you know, sheriff's deputies when the local county sheriff, who in a lot of places, particularly in rural parts of the country, is one of the most powerful people blocking access to the polling location, so that you have to like literally move your body around in order to gain access to the polling location. We've seen massive purges of the voter rolls, right? In Georgia, they employ a scheme called the exact match, where if your name, Michael, we just had Michael Harriot, and if they inverted the E and the A in his first name, which is a common mistake, that you don't exactly match what is in the Social Security Administration's database, and therefore they purge you from the voter rolls. There's use it or lose it in Georgia. Use it or lose it. If you don't vote in 2 federal elections back to back, you're on a list pending. And if you don't, you're on the list to be purged. You know, listen, Georgia's one of the few states that doesn't provide postage for people who are voting by mail. And its attacks are very much related to the fact that we're going to see millions of people vote by mail this year, because quite frankly, it's the safest option that many of us have. Safe in terms of managing your exposure to the virus, but also safe in terms of making sure that there's a paper trail that we can count votes. And so they range from the sort of violent and physical to the sophisticated and database that appear sort of race neutral on its face, but still have a disproportionate impact on Black voters and on participation in the process. And so what we say is that we have to meet that more sophisticated voter suppression with sophistication, right? Like our tactics, our response. Oh, I didn't even mention disinformation. I'm certain that Rashad is going to talk about the incredible work that they're doing at Color of Change, but intentionally peppering our social media conversations and our news feeds with false information, with lies that are meant to distract and dismay people is also voter suppression. And so again, you know, the thing that I want folks to be thinking about right now is, okay, you can't fix what you can't face, right? So we have faced the problem. We know that voter suppression is happening. We know that there's a targeted attack on Black folks and their participation in our democracy. Now, what are we going to do to fix it? And so those are the conversations that we're having right now. So we're having it with the folks from Black Voters Matter. Everybody's getting information. And so, yeah, that's the state of voter suppression, the state of our democracy. It is urgent. I need people to know that, like, your eyes are not deceiving you. This is happening, and we need to fight back.
Whew. All right, we got a lot going on, and there's a lot that we're up against. I want to just dive in a little bit more to this question of misinformation, and I want to talk to you, Brother Derrick, about how this administration is stirring all of these lies, frankly, about mail-in voting. So lots of intentional distortions around how safe or how secure vote by mail is. And it's directly targeting Black communities, which is causing confusion. It's causing concern. Can you talk a little bit about these concerns and talk to us about the most common myths around vote by mail and share your experiences of the reality of what it means to vote by mail?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank Rashad for allowing me to be anywhere near him. I mean, he's my idol, and I'm glad to be here. It was one of those scenarios we shouldn't expect anything different from this president, this administration. He lies with impunity. He cheats. He's a narcissist. He's an egomaniac. And so anything that he does at this juncture, we shouldn't be surprised. But in addition to that, we shouldn't be surprised with a system that has historically sought to minimize our voice, our vote, and our ability to exercise, as Tasha just said earlier, our agency. And we can trace this back throughout the history of participation in this country through voting, whether it's that short period called Reconstruction, when we hit up against this wall called redemption. If you ever study that period, some of the language around voter fraud and what we do is the same language that you're using today. When you bump our heads up against the period during segregation and the black codes and the slaughterhouse cases for the lawyers, it's the same type of approaches of using all of the strengths of the system to go against Black folks. It is not about anything more than controlling and dominating and controlling people for cheap and inexpensive labor. Part two, voting is about money and power. Who gets taxed, who's not taxed, and how those tax dollars are spent. And so in the power game, it is no room for us to talk about, we just want to be fair. Because in a power game, fairness have no space for that. And when people are in seats of power, they bend and contort the rules of engagement to a point where they're not identifiable. And laws are fluid, it's not stagnant. And so everything we're seeing now from the direct assault on the public,
Okay, looks like we will probably get Brother Derrick back, and I'll fill a little bit of space here by saying that we're so excited that we are working with groups like New Georgia Project to really move a Black agenda up and down the ballot. We're also so proud to be in partnership with Color of Change and Black Voters Matter. Brother Derrick, are you back with us? Yes, we can.
I was like Robert Smith. I said, you get $1 million and you get your loans paid off. That's what I said next.
I'm sorry I missed that announcement. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. So I think that in sum, not to take up too much time, what we're seeing is par for the course. Shouldn't be a surprise. It's not unusual for this country. It's not out of character for this president. And as Black folks, we got to understand that we are in the power game, not the game to be fair. Not the game where laws are the same all the time. It's a game where those who have power, they're not going to give it to you. They're not going to hand it over. They will contort the rules to fit their interests at all costs. And we need to be prepared for that, all the time. Vote by mail, when it first came out, I was one of the first people to say, this is not the panacea. That I live in the South. I see how people buy votes, whether it's through absentee voting schemes or you name it. In Georgia, Nse and Stacey and group, they had a very sophisticated model that they were able to implement. But truth be told, we don't have the Black political machinery in areas that we can implement this. The Alabama Democratic Caucus was one of the baddest machines in the nation, and it imploded at the end of the 90s. The Detroit political machine was outstanding, and it was ran into the ground because of internal corruption. The DC political machine imploded on its own weight The Atlanta political machine moved out to the suburbs because they made so much money, they left the core of what gave them the money. And I can go on across the country. Freedom in Kansas City is on its last leg. And I can tell you about all the political machines. There are only 3 operations that can control their data in a statewide operations. Anthony Digg being one, what we have in Mississippi, and what states you have in Georgia with Nse. Nobody else even control their own data. We are in the midst of a power war through this democracy. And if we're complaining about them trying to steal the election, we're talking the wrong thing. Because that's par for the course for this nation. It's par for the course for the person in the White House.
Woo! I had to sit up for that one, Brother Derrick. I had to sit up and take some notes because you just broke down a whole story about infrastructure that is needed to make our communities powerful. And what happens, right? When we're not able to sustain representation with the substance that is needed for us to leverage the power that we are building and that we have built. Speaking of building power, I want to turn now to my brother, Rashad Robinson, because, one of the things that I feel like I'm going to get tattooed on my forehead, and I might do it so that when you look in the mirror, it appears correctly. I want to talk to you, Rashad, about voting as a strategy and voting as a path to building long-term Black political power. You have been saying for years now that presence is not power, that power is power. And that in order for us to really be successful in changing the conditions that govern our lives, we have to make sure that we don't mistake presence for power, and also that we're able to turn presence into power and not just rely on presence as a symbol of being powerful because we're in powerful seats. It matters what you do when you're in there. So Rashad, talk to us about turning presence into power in an election cycle with a historic amount of firsts, but also some gaps, right, between where we want to be and where we are right now. Talk to us about what's the strategy to close that gap.
First of all, thank you for having me. It is I love you, sis. You're one of my closest, nearest, dearest. You're like family. And so I'll go anywhere you ask me to go. And to be also invited to be in conversation with Nse, LaTosha, and Derrick. Just, the idea of presence to power means that we actually have to have infrastructure to channel the hopes and aspirations of our people into real change. And here we have folks who are building, running, and moving infrastructure that does create the force multiplier for our participation. And so it's an honor to be here. And so I want to sort of root this in, right? I'm sitting actually in front of some old ebony jet prints. And I grew up in a house where Jet came once a week and Ebony and Essence came once a month. And I was educated about sort of monthly, growing up on Eastern Long Island, where I didn't have a Black teacher. My family got there through the Great Migration, farm fields of Virginia to farm fields of Eastern Long Island. And growing up in a place where, your family is facing all of the same sort of impacts. You hear the stories of the South, but I got stories of the North. And I will say all that to say that the sort of representation of Black faces in high places, we could just get inside these systems, we can make these systems work for us. And I don't want to take away what it means to achieve inside of racist structures. I don't want to take away what it means to celebrate the Black mayor or the new sort of Black representative and all of what that meant as as Laverne Cox says, a possibility model for so many of us. At the same time, when we mistake presence for power, we think we've done something that we haven't actually done. We mistake a Black president for thinking that we're post-racial. We mistake a lot of Black celebrities that America loves for thinking that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture. And America will celebrate, monetize, and elevate Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And those two things don't actually have to be in conflict. conflict. And so when I talk about not mistaking presence to power, what I'm really trying to say is presence is not necessarily bad. It just means that power is the ability to change the rules. And that has to actually be the sort of framework. And so when I think about it very clearly is back in 2016, we had gotten tired of showing up to district attorney offices around the country, making demands and recognizing, much like at the founding of Color of Change, as those levees broke and that flood that was caused by bad decision makers almost 15 years ago, Hurricane Katrina, that turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers with Black folks on their roofs begging for the government to do something, just like COVID, exposing a whole lot of things that people already knew. But at the heart of that, no one being nervous about disappointing Black people. And then coming in 2016 and recognizing that district attorneys were not nervous about disappointing us, that we could show up with petitions and it didn't matter, that we recognized that we couldn't walk up to their door, we had to kick their door in. And that meant that we had to build the infrastructure to channel the hopes, aspirations, and demands of our people into the electoral power to not just yell at people, but to fire people. And that was what we did. And then that became the change. But people would call us, newspapers would call us and they would say, so Color of Change has this strategy to elect more Black district attorneys. I was like, no. Hopefully we elect more Black district attorneys. Of course, a tie goes to the Black person. But at the end of the day, our goal is to elect prosecutors that will help to end mass incarceration, that see their job as something very different than what their predecessors saw their job. And so in Los Angeles right now, we've got to kick out a Black woman district attorney. And if we just have a strategy that's simply about representation, then we confuse people around all the ways in which Jackie Lacey has decided that cops are not to be held accountable, and that our community will be the sort of driving force to keeping the prison industrial complex alive in LA County. And she will do it with her Black face because we have somehow told a story that Black faces in high places can mean that alone is our liberation. And so we need to make that story complex for people and help to drive our participation towards things that actually make change. What I will say is that, I remember having a lot of conversations with folks as When They See Us was coming out, or a lot of conversations, Ava DuVernay's incredible project on Netflix about the Central Park Five, or even in these uprisings where people will say to us, just vote. And oftentimes they'll say it almost in a paternalistic way to younger activists. If you just vote, And I think in some ways, what frustrates me the most about it is the ahistorical sort of storytelling that somehow takes Black people out of being the protagonists in the American story of voting, which we are. There is no group of people that have fought harder, stood on longer lines, faced more indignities, faced deeper violence to express our will for a better future. So don't tell us just to vote, because Black people have made voting. People that are trying to fight for a better future in democracies around the world chant our chants, sing our songs, and learn from our strategies to fight for liberation and for the type of social and economic change that we've been able to build under democracies. It's not that Black communities are vulnerable. It's that Black people have been under attack and targeted and exploited. And no group of people could have faced the type of systemic oppression and the sort of interest in making us consistently in sort of a servitude state and still be in the place that we are, a place where we can still focus and develop joy and build culture and do all sorts of other things. And so part of how we channel presence to power is building the infrastructure that creates consequences, that makes those in power nervous about disappointing us, that does the work to kick people out of office and put people in office. And that means that is a 365-day effort. That means that we have to make sure that if a politician
is saying they are going to move reforms or going to hold police accountable, but they are taking money from the FOP and other police unions, that means that they are not going to hold police accountable, and we shouldn't trust them. If they say that they are going to do work to hold banks accountable, but yet they are funded by the banks, then they are trying to tell us a story because they do not believe that we are smart enough to know when someone is trying to trick us. And that, once again, is also why we need infrastructure. So we live in an age where there can be a lot of presence. Twitter celebrities that call themselves sort of movement builders. There can be a lot of presence where people claim that they are sort of driving efforts and demands, but actually are not on the other side to actually hold folks accountable. What I appreciate what you're doing here, both in terms of what you've built at Black to the Future and the Black Future Lab, and also the space by which you're offering up to bring all the voices you brought here today, is to set forward a new course about what does it mean to not just win elections, but to actually make change. Because I'll end here. Our work here is not to give politicians jobs regardless of their race. Our work here is to make Black people's lives better. And when Black people win, this country moves in the right direction for everyone. But even if it didn't move in the right direction for everyone, making Black people's lives better would be enough in and of itself without any other thing on top of it. And that is why we do this work. And in many ways, that is why we have to hold everyone accountable, regardless of their race, because our job is not to get more Black faces in high places. Our job is to open up the space so more of us can live in a more human and less hostile world.
You know, I love that he called out social justice celebrities, because we got to call those out. Social media celebrities will do more harm to us than help us, because having followings is not activism. Having followers will not create power. If you think about John Lewis, he was an ordinary person who did extraordinary things, but the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as internationally recognized as it was, it left a power vacuum in Selma.
That's right.
So the same mayor that was there in 1965 was still mayor in 2000 in that 70% Black city.
That's right.
LaTosha and I was there. Joe Must Go, that was the campaign. So it frustrates me to no end when people celebrate at protest, but the protests lead nowhere other than a burning of energy, because protests need to drive the next conversation to power. And power in this context, the capacity to make things happen or not, goes to public policy to address structural racism. And once you get that public policy in place, then it's about implementation and then protecting it. And so we need to have more spaces like this to talk about power dynamics, not talking to social media celebrities, because that frustrates me to no end.
I understand it.
My brothers got me so fired up. Come on, Rashad. I was over there in the amen corner. You should have heard me over here between you and Derrick. Y'all know in the South, you know, we got to say amen. I was like, I'm going to be respectful. The only thing that I want to say, something that Derrick said that I think is really important, I think both of you, that one, you know, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who we embrace in our community, don't and see as a part of Black liberation. So I don't know what.
And Tasha say not only embrace LaTosha, that we knew, you and I knew.
That we knew, that we met, that we're actually an extension of his work. Right. And so that one of the things that he would say is that there is mobilization and then there's organization. They are two different things. Mobilization can get people activated. Right. But we are in this time of instant everything. We got instant coffee. We got instant food in the microwave, and we got instant activists. That ain't how it work, y'all. That ultimately, in terms of you got to be even in the work, you got to be grounded and rooted in this work. Like if you're doing work to really talk about oppression and end the oppression of our people, like this can't be just automatic. Like, okay, I'm an activist. I'm an automatic activist. I'm gonna tear down those organizations that have been around for 100 years, right? I'm gonna tear down the activists that have been out there because they don't know what they're doing because the party just started since I showed up. The bottom line is anti. That's a historical and it's anti. It's anti to everything that we believe in. That ultimately, that what mobilization gives us an opportunity to do is to really be able to tap into the energy. but organization is going to keep us sustaining it. I'm going to say this, and I think I've told Derrick this, that even NAACP, when Cliff and I started Black Voters Matter, we didn't have any staff, we didn't have any money. I always say that Cliff had us in these cheap rental cars that we were going all around on the South End. When we would get to a community, it is the only organization that every single community, there was no organization, if there was no anything, we would ask, is there somebody in NAACP? And they were like, yeah, Miss such and such is down on earth. It was like the salt of the earth. We have to really recognize that we need, because sometimes we go with the new shiny coins and we need new organizations. I mean, I run one, but my work is 27 years long, right? And it's rooted in that history. And so we need these standing organizations, these Black organizations that have been here for years. There's a value, there's a reason. There's a lot of like wisdom and networks that are there. And the new organizations that are coming up bring that kind of energy and that brilliance. And it's really, really having all of those options for our people that we need. And so I'm just raising that because I think sometimes we get caught up in this competitive nature that also is created by capitalism, right? To have us fighting each other and positioning each other, who got the most followers. I'm gonna know how you got your followers. Who can you move to do something? Like that's your followers.
Well, okay, hold on now. I'm gonna jump in.
To that point about capitalism, I actually just think that it's an area where I think our movements just need to be a lot more focused over the years. There's all sorts of ways where I think capitalist forces have been able to infiltrate our larger focus, and sometimes they are the folks standing in the way. So, Congresswoman Pressley said it best. It's okay to say Black Lives Matter, but show me your budget. Show me your policies. Show me your board list, right? I do think that we are also in this moment, and this is a lot of work that, right, Derrick and I have been doing together through the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, specifically at focusing on the largest communications platform the world has ever known, with 2.6 billion users, more followers than Christianity, that can dictate elections and economy, and in some places around the world have helped to incite genocide. We have to do the work to hold corporations accountable. And I say that the same way I think about police unions. So many of the issues that we're facing, it's not that we are in a hearts and minds space, we are in a power game, because there are forces that may look us in our eyes, give a little bit of money to people that look like us, and then stand in the way when we are not in the room and block the things that will actually make change. A couple of dollars that means, sending water bottles to Flint instead of actually cleaning up the pipes, which means you have to pay your fair share of taxes. Sponsoring service days in inner city schools instead of actually doing the work to make sure public education is funded at scale, fairly and equally, right? If major corporations in this country wanted to end the type of racist, terrorist policing that we see in our communities, major corporations could do it overnight. But they see policing as protecting them regardless of what they may say in their statements, or they just stay silent. And so part of what we have to do, and I have seen it firsthand in work in other communities, is we have to change what is the floor and what is the ceiling for what does it mean to be our friends.
All right, so I'm gonna jump in because y'all trying to run this panel without me, and I won't allow it. But also, y'all out here snatching edges. I mean, these edges is blown back, and I know there's more to this conversation, and we're going to have it, but just not today. So here's the thing. I wish that this panel was on the main stage of the DNC, because just to keep it a buck, these are the conversations that we need to be having right now about what politics needs to look like in this country from now moving forward. I want to thank each of you, brilliant, brilliant strategists, for joining me today. Thank you, Rashad Robinson, spokesperson for Color of Change PAC and president of Color of Change. Thank you, LaTosha Brown, founder of Black Voters Matter. Thank you, Derrick Johnson, head of the oldest and largest civil rights organization in the country, the NAACP. And thank you to Nse Ufot, who had to jump off because, we be over here talking. She was like, look, I got a hard stop, but I love y'all. So Nse, we appreciate you, sis. Thank you for joining us. She is the CEO of the New Georgia Project. I want to talk with y'all now about how you can get involved. We've done a lot of talking about what's going on, what we need to be doing, and now I want to give you something to actually do. So first and foremost, you can impact what happens in this election cycle. We have been in states across the country for the last 2 years, building relationships with folks, trying to make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need to be powerful. We are building that infrastructure with you, and we want you to join it. So here's the deal. We've got a volunteer training and meeting on Tuesday, September 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'd love for you to join us. 2020 is a year unlike any that we've seen in our lifetime. And now, more than ever, we need a government by the people, for the people, about the people. So we have too much at stake, Black folks, to not have our voices heard and our needs addressed. And now is our chance to unrig the rules, level the playing field, and put into place policies that work for us. You can join our volunteer training by going to bit.ly/training up. Again, that's bit.ly/training up. I also, before we head out, want to give a special shout out to our ASL interpreter, Billy Sanders. You have been killing the game. Thank you so much for supporting us and making sure that this conversation was accessible. And to all of y'all watching, please follow Black to the Future Action Fund for updates on how you can get involved and updates about how you can be powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. I'm Alicia Garza, principal of the Black to the Future Action Fund, and I'm signing off for the night. Thank you to all of our illustrious guests for joining us, and we'll see you at the ballot box.